Hello everybody, I'm Terry Peterman, the Internet Electrician, and welcome to another one of our video shorts on current topics. In this video, I'm going to take you through step-by-step instruction on how to install a 30 amp 125 volt RV receptacle. We're going to take this project right from the selection of the location to the mounting of the box, the running of the wire, and connection right into a 30 amp one pole breaker in our panel. We're going to use our demonstration board here behind me, and I've got all the materials together that we need, so let's get started. Alright, so talking about the materials that we're going to require, I've picked up a 4x4 junction box. That's a surface mount style 4x4 metal box. I've got all the connectors, screws, etc. that I'm going to need, staples. Also, I have a cover plate for my receptacle. That's a metal surface type cover plate. This is the receptacle that we'll be installing. That's a 30 amp 125 volt RV receptacle. The NEMA configuration is a TT-30R, or sometimes you'll see it listed as an RV-30R. It's got a hot, neutral, and a ground connection on it. I've got the breaker we'll need for my Cutler hammer panel behind us on the demonstration board. This is a BR style 30 amp 125 volt or single pole breaker, push-in style, which is the BR style. And then we've picked up a little bit of wire that we're going to need. NM wire. This is Romex, trade name Romex, number 10 AWG, 2 conductor with the ground. And next we'll talk about the location of your receptacle. So when you're selecting a location to put your RV receptacle, obviously you want it as close as possible to the RV where it's going to be parked so that you can avoid the use of extension cords. Typically you're going to be putting in a receptacle like this at home just to keep your batteries all charged up and your RV functioning while it's parked. Of course, when you go to an RV park, you're going to have your appropriate connections there. So for the purpose of this video, we're just going to mount it right here on the demonstration board, and we'll just show you the necessary steps to get that done. So as I mentioned, we're going to mount this box on a plywood wall. So what I want to do is put the box so that the two good firm mounting holes will line up with where I know the stud is behind this wall, and that happens to be right there. So I'm going to line it up so that my two main screw holes will screw tightly into the stud, and then I want to have my wire enter through the back of the box for a nice neat installation. So I'm going to use the knockout on this side. I'm going to knock that out, and then I'm going to make a hole in behind here in the plywood that's big enough to accept the wire and the connector so that the connection, the entrance into the box, will be hidden from view, and the box will be firmly mounted on the plywood here. Very solid connection, and then the wire will come out the back of the box through the studs over to the panel. Okay, so I've marked by location of the hole that I need to drill for the hole saw hole that'll accommodate the size of that 2 screw connector. So just drill that hole through. So I've made my hole into the plywood. That is going to accommodate the box, which I've mounted now the 2 screw cable connector into the back of the box. The hole's large enough to accommodate that and allow the box to fit flush against the wall. So everything's going to work. I'm not going to screw it to the stud yet. First we're going to run our wire. Now running the wire through the walls can be a tricky task. Of course here all I'm using is a demonstration with a piece of cardboard, and I have full access to my demonstration wall behind, but you may have other issues to deal with, and that might mean taking off some plywood to get that wire fished in. But the bottom line is you need to get the wire through the wall back to the panel location to do your connections there. So let's get that wire run. Alright, so I've managed to fish my cables through the wall. I've got a run out of the hole in the plywood here ready to go into the box, and I've got my other end ran over to the panel, which we'll deal with later. So now I want to strip the cable. Get rid of my outer jacket. away the excess of the exterior sheath here. And we'll run this cable into the back of the box and then tighten down our cable clamp. I'm going to make sure that the cable enters through the cable clamp and that the exterior sheath of the NMD cable runs right through the box. Now I'm just going to tighten the cable clamp. Making sure I tighten it evenly on both sides, not to put too much stress on the cable, yet you want to hold it snugly in there. Now, as you can see, I've got the sheath running through the cable clamp, extending into the box. Now we're ready to mount the box onto the wall. For this, I'll use my cordless DeWalt drill. Push the box back into place, making sure it's flush. And okay, so the box is mounted firmly. We're ready to put the receptacle on. Right, so now that the box is mounted firmly in place and my cable has entered the back of the box through the cable clamp, first we want to deal with our ground wire. So you want to wrap your ground wire around the box screw at the back of the box. And you want a nice tight loop around there. And then tighten the ground screw in the back of the box with your bare ground wire looping clockwise around the screw. Nice firm connection there that's not going anywhere. Now the ground wire is ready to connect. I'm going to strip our neutral. And about 3/8 to 1/2 inch of wire you want to strip. You can see that. And the hot wire. Same thing with it. Now here's your receptacle. We're going to connect the ground wire first, and then we're going to connect the hot and the neutral. So the ground wire is clearly marked on the back of the receptacle. However, it's the round pin, and then on the upper right you have your hot wire, and your upper left you have your white neutral conductor. So back, connecting the receptacle. Ground wire first. I always like to work, when I'm connecting things, I like to connect the ground first, the neutral second, and the hot last. And if you're disconnecting a device, I always do it in reverse order. Disconnect the hot first, the white second, or the neutral second, and the ground last. Now the white neutral conductor goes in. You want to make sure your connections are very snug. Now the hot wire, the last one to go in, the black wire. Okay, and then the last thing you want to do is a tug test. Make sure those wires aren't going to pull out when you maneuver the receptacle into place to mount it to the cover plate, and then you mount the cover plate to the box. So kind of a test fit here. Make sure everything's going to work. You want to kind of position it in the box the way it's going to be once it's mounted to the cover, and make sure none of your wires are going to be pinching against the box. Okay, so we've got that pretty much in place. Now we remove the box screws. One on each corner of this 4x4 box. Then we're ready to mount the receptacle. It gets mounted to the cover plate. So you fit the plate on top of the receptacle, and the two screws that were provided with the plate they thread right into the 632 screw holes that are in the receptacle. And you tighten them down nice and snug. Now your plate's ready to mount to the box. Okay, we've got our box mounted, our receptacle wired in, connected to the plate, and the plate mounted firmly to the box. Now we can go to the other end at the panel and bring our wires into the panel, make our connections there, and then we can test out our receptacle. Okay, here at the panel end, we've got our cable ran through the studs and to the panel. We've got our main breaker shut off, because then that ensures that these hot bars here that you see, the hot buses, are dead. So we have no danger of an electrical shock. I've got some extra power turned on here so I can have some lighting hooked up to a different source. And we're ready to put our connector into the panel. I've knocked out a knockout here in the bottom of the panel, 1/2-inch knockout. I insert my two screw connector, cable connector, into the bottom of the panel. Tighten the lock nut. And then with my lineman plier, I just snug that up. And now the lock nut and the connector is tight in the panel. Now I bring my cable. Already stripped it here. Bring it up through the connector. And then tighten my screws on the connector. Again, make sure they're tightened evenly on the cable. Make sure that the jacket, the sheath of the cable extends up through the connector and into the panel, and that you're tightening these screws on the exterior sheath of the cable and not on the bare wires, or on the stripped wires I should say. And just snug. You don't need to over tighten these, just so that it's firmly tightened on the exterior sheath of the cable and that you're not going to be able to pull that cable out of the panel. Okay, as always, I like to connect my ground wire first. So I pull my hot and neutral out of the way. And I want to run that ground wire back up behind everything else here. And kind of give it a pre-bend here so that it's going to be easier to work its way back into the back of the panel. And I don't know if you can see that back lug here right screwed to the panel itself. The exterior of the panel is a ground lug or a ground bar that the terminals are on for the ground screws. So I want to loosen off one of those screws. And work that ground wire back into place. And again, tighten your screw firmly. Tuck that ground wire into the back of the panel, out of the way. Next is my neutral wire. So it's going to go to the neutral bus bar, as you can see where all the other neutral wires are tied into. I'm also going to tie this neutral wire into the neutral bus bar. Strip just enough conductor that it goes through the lug. Tighten that firmly, and you all want to make a nice neat job of bending your wires into place here. Follow the pattern of the rest of the panel, how the connections have been made. And after you've wiggled the wires around a little bit, you want to re-snug them and any other wires you might have moved, because sometimes after you wiggle things around inside a panel or any kind of a device box, once you move things around a little bit, wires can come loose again. So check any terminations that you can get at and just double check that they're all tight. Okay, so my neutral wire is on, my ground wire is onto the ground lug. Now it's time to install the breaker. It's a BR 30 amp single pole breaker. We'll take the next available position here in the panel. These breakers slip back and in first, and then push them onto the bus bar. So that breaker's in place. Now we're ready to run our hot conductor up to the breaker. A little difficult to do here with my opposite hands to give you a good view of what I'm doing. Tighten that lug on the breaker. And again, a tug test. Make sure it's firmly connected to the breaker lug. Straighten your wires out. Make them look nice and neat in the panel. Okay, now we're ready to knock out a new position in our panel cover, because we need to knock out a new full single slot in the breaker panel cover so that this new breaker will fit when we reinstall our cover. Then we'll turn on the breaker and we'll check things out with our meter, make sure we've all made the connections properly and the meter readings are correct on the receptacle. Okay, I've knocked out that final panel position to make room for this 30 amp breaker, reinstalled the panel cover. We're ready to turn on that breaker and go check our receptacle to make sure we've got all the connections correct and it's got the correct readings at the receptacle. Okay, so now that we've got the breaker installed, the wire in the panel, the breaker turned on, now we can check our work and make sure everything's connected properly. So first off, we want to check from our hot slot here in the receptacle and check it to ground to make sure we've got the proper voltage. And we have 120 volts there. And we want to check from that hot slot into the neutral slot. And if you can see that, 119 or 120 volts there. So that's correct. And then we would like to check from hot to the ground prong and 119 volts. So we're good to go. We're ready to plug in our RV. Okay, so the final step in your project is you want to go back to the panel now. Make sure you label that new breaker as your RV receptacle breaker. And you want to make sure you clean up after yourself. Neaten up all your wires, make sure you staple them properly, make sure they are nice and straight going into your panel, match the rest of the wiring in the panel, and your project is complete. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.